Here is something strange that has always been true of you, long before you ever heard the word quantum. You have only ever experienced being alive. Every single moment you can recall, every instant of awareness you have ever had, has been a moment in which you existed, because those are the only kind of moments awareness can hold. You have never had, and never will have, a single experience of your own absence. And there is a corner of physics that takes that quiet, ordinary fact and turns it into one of the most disturbing ideas anyone has ever proposed. That your thread of experience is structurally forbidden from ever ending. That you will always find yourself among the survivors, no matter how improbable the survival, no matter what it costs. It sounds at first almost like good news. It is not. So is your own endlessness a comfort, or the loneliest fate imaginable? Make yourself comfortable, subscribe if you haven't yet, and stay with me, because to understand why this idea grips us, and why it finally falls apart, is the closest thing to peace this subject has to offer. Let's dive in. Part 1. The thing you cannot picture. There is a small experiment you have almost certainly run on yourself, probably late at night, probably without ever deciding to. You were lying in the dark and your mind wandered to the fact that one day you will not be here, and you tried, for just a moment, to picture it. Not the funeral, not the people you would leave behind, the thing itself, the actual experience of not existing. And if you are like nearly everyone who has ever tried, you found that the picture would not hold still. Every time you tried to imagine the darkness after the last moment, there was still, somehow, a you in the frame, watching the darkness, noticing the silence, registering the absence. You could not get yourself out of the picture, because the moment you removed the watcher, there was nothing left to do the imagining. That failure is not a personal flaw, and it is not a lack of effort. It is a structural feature of what it is to be a mind. You have spent your entire life on the inside of an unbroken stream of experience, and that stream has a peculiar property. It has no memory of its own beginning that you can actually reach, and it can form no honest image of its own ending. You can think the words, "I will not exist." You can believe them completely, but you cannot experience them, not even in imagination, because experience is exactly the thing that would have to be absent, and absence is not a thing the mind can host as a picture. So you reach for it, and your imagination quietly hands you a substitute, a dimly lit room with you still in it, and calls that death. It is not death. It is the closest your mind can get, and the gap between the two is the subject of everything that follows. I want to start here, in the dark, before any physics, because I need you to feel that you have already brushed up against the strangeness at the center of this video long before you ever heard the word quantum. The unease you felt in that moment, the sense that something does not add up about your own ending, is not naive. It is pointing at something real. For most of human history, people have managed that unease with stories, with faith, with the comfort of meaning. What I want to do tonight is something different. I want to take the most successful, most precisely tested theory in the history of science, the theory that built the world you live in, and follow one particular reading of it all the way to its conclusion about your own death. And the conclusion it offers is not comfort. It is one of the most disturbing ideas in all of physics, an idea that some serious scientists have taken seriously, and it says, in plain language, that your stream of experience may never end. Not because you are special, not because anything is watching over you, but because of the cold structure of how reality might be built. The idea has a name. It is usually called quantum immortality, and its darker twin is called quantum suicide, and by the time we are done you will understand exactly where both of them come from, exactly how the argument is assembled, and exactly why it almost certainly fails. But I'm not going to rush to the comfort of why it fails. That would cheat you out of the actual experience of this idea, which is that for a little while, if you follow it honestly, it seems like it might be true, and there is no obvious place to push back. The dismantling, when it comes, is worth more if you have first felt the floor go soft beneath you. So we are going to build the thing carefully, piece by piece, the way it was actually built by the physicists who first thought it through, and we're going to let it stand at its full and frightening height before we walk around behind it and see what is holding it up. You will need 3 things to follow the argument, and we're going to collect them one at a time, slowly, with no jargon left unexplained. The first is the strange, unresolved gap at the very centre of quantum mechanics, the question the theory has never answered. The question of why you only ever see one version of events when the math insists on describing many. The second is the boldest attempt anyone has ever made to fill that gap, an idea that says the universe does not choose between the possibilities at all, that every outcome happens, each in its own branch of reality. And the third is a single assumption, quiet and almost reasonable sounding, about where your conscious experience has to go when one of those branches runs into a wall. Stack those 3 together in the right order, and the immortality conclusion falls out almost on its own. You will see it coming, and you still will not be able to stop it. Here is the phrase I want you to carry with you through all of this, because we are going to come back to it at the very end, and when we do, its meaning will have completely changed. The phrase is this: you have only ever experienced being alive. Right now it sounds like nothing, like a tautology, like a sentence that barely says anything at all. Of course, you have only ever experienced being alive. What else would you experience? Hold on to it anyway. Set it somewhere safe in the back of your mind. Because that small, obvious, almost silly observation is going to turn out to be the hidden engine underneath this entire nightmare. The quiet assumption that the whole argument secretly runs on, and the thing that, once you see it clearly, finally lets you set the nightmare back down. But that is the end of the journey, and we are at the beginning. So let me take you to the place where all of this starts, which is not a deathbed and not a graveyard, but something far stranger and far more ordinary. It starts with a single particle, and a question so simple that it sounds like it should have been answered 100 years ago, and so unresolved that it has not been answered yet. The question is this: when you're not looking at the world, what is it actually doing? And the reason that question matters for your own mortality is something we're going to have to earn one step at a time. So let us take the first step and look at the gap that sits, unfilled, at the centre of everything we know. Part 2. The gap at the centre of everything. Let me tell you how good quantum mechanics is, because you cannot understand why the immortality argument is so hard to dismiss until you understand that it grows out of the most reliable knowledge human beings have ever produced. Quantum mechanics is the theory of the very small, the rulebook for atoms and particles and light, and it is correct to a degree that has no real parallel anywhere else in science. There is a particular property of the electron, a tiny magnetic strength it carries, that the theory predicts and that experiments measure, and the prediction and the measurement agree to better than 1 part in 1 trillion. Imagine measuring the distance from your home to the moon, and being off by less than the width of a single human hair. That is the kind of precision we're talking about. Every transistor in the device you're listening on, every laser, every medical scanner, the glow of every star, all of it runs on these rules, and the rules have never once been caught being wrong. And yet, at the very centre of this flawless theory, there is a hole. There is a question the theory cannot answer, a gap so fundamental and so embarrassing that physicists have argued about it for nearly 100 years without resolving it. To understand the gap, I need to introduce you to the central character of quantum mechanics, the thing that does all the work, an object called the wave function. When physicists want to describe a particle, an electron say, they do not write down where it is, they write down its wave function, and the wave function does something that has no equivalent in everyday life. It does not tell you that the electron is here, or that it is there. It tells you that the electron is, in a very real and measurable sense, a weighted combination of here and there at the same time, a mixture of possibilities, all coexisting. Physicists call that condition a superposition, and it is not a figure of speech and not a statement about our ignorance. The electron genuinely behaves as though it is taking all its available paths at once, and you can prove it, because those paths interfere with each other in ways that only make sense if they are all really happening. I want to give you the single cleanest demonstration of this, because it is the experiment that, more than any other, forces the strangeness on you and refuses to let you explain it away. It is called the double-slit experiment, and the physicist Richard Feynman once said it contains the only real mystery of quantum mechanics, that everything else follows from it. Here is the setup. You have a barrier with two narrow slits cut into it, side by side, and a screen behind it, and you fire particles, electrons say, one at a time, at the barrier. Common sense says each electron must go through one slit or the other, and so over time you should see two simple bands building up on the screen, one behind each slit where the electrons piled up. That is what particles do. But that is not what happens. What builds up on the screen, electron by single electron, is not two bands. It is a pattern of many stripes, bright and dark alternating, the unmistakable signature of waves interfering with one another, the same pattern you get when two ripples on a pond cross and add up in some places and cancel out in others. The unsettling part is that this pattern builds up even when you fire the electrons one at a time, with long gaps between them, so that there is never more than a single electron inside the apparatus at once. There is nothing for each electron to interfere with except, somehow, itself. The only way to make sense of the stripes is that each single electron goes through both slits at once, as a spread of possibility, and interferes with itself on the way to the screen. It is in a superposition of through the left slit and through the right slit both at the same time, and the two possibilities recombine and paint the striped pattern. And here is the move that should make the hair on your arm stand up. If you place a detector at the slits to catch the electron in the act, to see which slit it actually goes through, the electron always turns out to go through exactly one slit, like a sensible particle, and the striped interference pattern simply vanishes, replaced by the two plain bands common sense expected all along. Look, and you get one slit and no stripes. Do not look, and you get both slits and the stripes. The act of finding out which path was taken destroys the very thing that made the experiment strange. This is the measurement problem, alive, in a single apparatus you can build in a university basement, and it has been performed countless times, with electrons, with whole atoms, even with large molecules built from hundreds of atoms. The smallness of the thing is not the point. The point is that reality, when unobserved, behaves like a spread of coexisting possibilities, and when observed, shows you exactly one, and nothing in the theory explains the difference between the two. There is an equation that governs how the wave function changes over time. It was written down in 1926 by an Austrian physicist named Erwin Schrödinger, and it is one of the most important equations ever discovered. Here is the crucial thing about it. The Schrödinger equation is smooth. It is continuous. It is completely deterministic, which means that if you know the wave function now, the equation tells you exactly what it will be later, with no randomness at all, and it never, ever, on its own, picks a single outcome. Left to itself, the equation just keeps the possibilities spreading and evolving forward in time, the here and the there flowing along together, the superposition rolling on. The equation describes a world of many coexisting possibilities, and it describes that world perfectly. But that is not the world you see. When you actually go and measure where the electron is, you do not find a mixture. You find it in one place, here or there, one definite answer. The detector clicks in a single spot. The needle points to a single number. The smooth, branching, many-valued wave function somehow becomes one sharp fact at the exact instant you look at it. And nothing in the Schrödinger equation tells you why. The equation describes the spreading of possibilities. It does not describe the sudden snap to a single result. That snap, that collapse from many possibilities to one, is something physicists had to add to the theory by hand, as a separate rule, because the equation refuses to do it. The standard recipe for handling this is about 100 years old, and it is named, loosely, the Copenhagen interpretation, after the city where the physicist Niels Bohr did much of his work. The recipe says in effect this: while you're not looking, the wave function spreads out according to Schrödinger's equation, exploring all its possibilities. But the moment you make a measurement, the wave function collapses. It jumps, instantaneously and at random, from the spread of possibilities down to one single actual result. And the probability of getting any particular result is given by a rule discovered by the physicist Max Born, also in 1926, which says the likelihood of an outcome is the square of how much that outcome was represented in the wave function. The Born rule works flawlessly. Bet on quantum mechanics using the Born rule and you will never lose. It is the core of why the theory is so accurate. But notice what the recipe does not say. It does not say what a measurement actually is. It does not say why measurement should be special, why the act of looking should have the magical power to force nature to choose. It does not tell you where the line is between the quantum world, where things can be in many states at once, and the everyday world, where things are stubbornly in one state. And worst of all, it does not say what the word collapse actually means, what physical process is supposedly happening when many possibilities become one. The recipe is a set of instructions that works perfectly and explains nothing. It is as if you had a cookbook that produced flawless results every time, but, at the crucial step, simply said, and then a miracle occurs. That miracle, that unexplained jump from the many to the one, is what physicists call the measurement problem. It is the gap at the centre of the most successful theory ever written, and it is the crack out of which our entire nightmare is going to crawl. A physicist named Erwin Schrödinger, the same man who gave us the equation, hated this collapse business so much that in 1935 he designed a thought experiment to show how absurd it was. You've probably heard of it, because it has become one of the most famous images in all of science, even among people who have never studied physics. It involves a cat. Schrödinger said, imagine you seal a cat inside a box, and inside that box you place a single radioactive atom, a detector, and a vial of poison. The setup is rigged so that if the atom decays, the detector trips, the poison is released, and the cat dies. If the atom does not decay, nothing happens, and the cat lives. Now the radioactive atom is a quantum system. Before anyone looks, its wave function says it is in a superposition, a mixture of decayed and not decayed at the same time, and here is Schrödinger's needle. If the atom is in a superposition of decayed and not decayed, and the fate of the cat is tied directly to the atom, then by the strict logic of the theory, until someone opens the box and looks, the entire contents of that box, atom and detector and poison and cat, must be described by a single wave function, in which the cat is in a superposition of dead and alive. Not dead, not alive, but a genuine mixture of both at once, exactly the way the electron is a mixture of here and there. Schrödinger thought this was self-evidently ridiculous. A cat, he insisted, is obviously either alive or dead. His point was sharp and serious. The collapse recipe never tells you at what scale the absurdity is supposed to stop. We accept that a single atom can be in two states at once. Fine. But can a detector, can a cat, can a human being, can the entire universe? Where exactly does the line fall and what draws it? The Copenhagen recipe has no answer. It just waves its hands at the word measurement and hopes you do not ask too hard. Schrödinger meant the cat as a warning, a way of saying, look how broken this is. But there was another way to respond to the cat, a way Schrödinger never seriously entertained, a way that does not flinch from the absurdity but instead embraces it completely. What if the cat really is in both states? What if there is no line, no special scale, no magical moment of collapse, and the superposition just keeps going, all the way up through the detector and the poison and the cat and you and the whole world? What if the reason you only ever see one cat is not that the universe chooses, but that you too split? That is the idea we turn to next, and it is the second of our three pieces, and it is the boldest single move anyone has ever made in the history of physics. Because to make the measurement problem go away, one young man at Princeton was willing to accept a price that almost everyone else found too high to pay. He was willing to accept that the box never collapses, that the cat is always both, and that every time the world could go two ways, it goes both. Let me tell you what that costs, and let me tell you what it buys. Part 3. The universe that refuses to choose. In the autumn of 1954, a graduate student at Princeton University was, by his own later account, drinking sherry with friends when the central idea of his life came to him. His name was Hugh Everett III. He was sharp, irreverent, fond of science fiction and good food and argument, and he was studying under one of the most imaginative physicists of the century, John Archibald Wheeler, the man who would later coin the term black hole. Everett was wrestling with the measurement problem, the gap we just walked through, and he had what I think is one of the cleanest and most radical ideas anyone has ever had about the nature of reality. His idea was, at its core, an act of subtraction. He looked at the two pieces of the Copenhagen recipe, the smooth Schrödinger equation that spreads possibilities, and the mysterious collapse that snaps them down to one, and he asked a question that sounds almost too simple to be profound. What if we just delete the collapse? Think about what that means. The collapse was the part nobody could define, the miracle step, the place where the cookbook said a miracle occurs. It was bolted on by hand precisely because the equation would not produce it. So Everett said, let us stop bolting it on. Let us keep only the part of the theory that actually works as physics, the smooth Schrödinger equation, and let us apply it to everything with no exceptions, not just to the electron, to the detector that measures the electron, to the physicist who reads the detector, to the air in the room and the building and the planet. Everything obeys the one equation all the time, and nothing ever collapses. And then he worked out, with care, what that honestly implies. And what it implies is staggering. Follow it slowly. Suppose an electron is in a superposition of two states, call them up and down, and a physicist is going to measure it. Under the old recipe, the measurement collapses the electron into either up or down, at random. But Everett said there is no collapse. So what does the equation actually say happens? It says the physicist becomes entangled with the electron. The physicist's own wave function joins with the electrons, and the combined system evolves into a superposition of two pieces. In one piece, the electron is up and the physicist is seen up and is thinking, I measured up. In the other piece, the electron is down and the physicist is seen down and is thinking, I measured down. Both of these pieces are fully real. Both contain a complete conscious physicist, with memories and thoughts and a sense of having observed a single definite result. Neither one feels incomplete, neither one feels like half of anything. Each version of the physicist is utterly convinced that they saw the one and only outcome, and each is right within their own branch. The universe, in Everett's picture, did not choose between up and down. It branched. It split into two histories, both equally real, each containing its own copy of the physicist who believes their result was the only thing that happened. And this is not a special event that requires a laboratory. It happens constantly, everywhere, at every moment, for every quantum event that has more than one possible outcome, which is essentially all of them. Reality, on this view, is not a single thread running from past to future. It is a ceaselessly dividing tree, branching and branching again, an unimaginable multitude of parallel histories all growing out of the same trunk, each one as solid and real to its inhabitants as this one feels to you right now. Everett called it the relative state formulation, a dry and modest name. The more famous name came later, in 1970, when the physicist Bryce DeWitt popularized it and gave it the title that stuck, the many worlds interpretation. Now, I know how this sounds. It sounds like the wildest kind of science fiction, like something invented to sell paperback novels. And your first instinct, like almost everyone's, is probably to wave it away, Surely this is too much. Surely the simpler explanation is that the universe just picks one outcome and moves on. But here is the thing I need you to sit with, because it is the reason the immortality argument cannot be dismissed by simply dismissing many worlds. By the ordinary standards physicists use to judge theories, many worlds is not the extravagant option. It is the economical one. Think about it. The Copenhagen recipe has to add an entire extra process to the theory, the collapse, a process nobody can define, nobody can locate, and nobody can explain. Many worlds adds nothing. It takes the equation we already have, the equation we know works, and it simply takes it literally and refuses to add anything on top. The strangeness is not in the math. The math is the same. The strangeness is only in what the math was saying all along, if you had the nerve to believe it. This is why many worlds is not a fringe position held by cranks. It is a mainstream contender, taken seriously by some of the most respected physicists alive. David Deutsch, one of the founding figures of quantum computing, argues that you cannot even make sense of how a quantum computer does what it does unless the other branches are physically real, unless the computation is, in some sense, being shared across parallel worlds. The physicist Sean Carroll wrote an entire book making the modern case for many worlds, arguing that it is the most honest reading of the theory and that physicists should stop being embarrassed by it. These are not people on the margins, they are at the centre of the field, and that matters enormously for where we are going, because it means that when the immortality argument says, if many worlds is true, then such and such follows, you cannot escape by saying many worlds is obviously false. It is not obviously false. It may well be true, and if it is, we have to take seriously what it implies about you. There is one more piece I have to give you before the picture is complete, and it answers the most natural objection you're probably already forming. If the world is constantly splitting into parallel branches, why have you never noticed? Why do you never see the other version of yourself? The one who found the dead cat, the one who turned left instead of right? Why does your reality feel so seamlessly, stubbornly single? The answer is a process with a slightly technical name and a beautiful, important meaning. The process is called decoherence, and it was worked out by a physicist named H. Dieter Zeh in 1970 and developed through the 1980s by Wojciech Zurek. Here is what it says, in plain terms. The reason different branches could, in principle, be detected is that quantum possibilities can interfere with one another, can merge and ripple together when they are kept perfectly isolated. But the moment a quantum system touches its messy environment, the trillions of air molecules, the photons of light, the warm wet chemistry of a living brain, those delicate relationships that would allow the branches to interfere get scrambled and scattered almost instantly across countless particles. And once that happens, the branches become, for all practical purposes, permanently sealed off from one another. Let me give you the phrase to carry, because like the other one, it is going to come back transformed. The branches never touch. Once decoherence has done its work, and it does its work in a tiny fraction of a second for anything as large as a cat or a person, the parallel branches cannot communicate, cannot interfere, cannot reach across to one another in any way at all. Each one becomes a private, self-contained reality, and the beings inside each branch have no way whatsoever to detect the others. This is not a temporary limitation of our instruments. It is a fundamental structural fact about how the splitting works. Decoherence is the reason the quantum world, with all its blended possibilities, looks so solid and classical and single to creatures like us. And it is the reason each branch is a sealed room, with no doors and no windows between it and the rooms next door. The branches never touch. Remember that. It is going to be the thing that makes the immortality argument both irresistible and, in the end, impossible to ever test. So now we have two of our three pieces. We have the measurement problem, the gap where the theory refuses to say why we see one outcome instead of many. And we have the many worlds answer, which fills the gap by saying we see one outcome because we ourselves split, and we only ever ride along inside a single branch, sealed off from all the others by decoherence, a constantly dividing tree of equally real worlds, and you're not a single thread running through it, but something more like a river, branching endlessly into separate channels. It is a strange and grand picture, and so far it is only strange and grand. It has not yet said anything frightening about you. That changes now, because there is a man who took this branching universe and asked a single, simple, terrible question about it. He asked, what happens to a branch when it runs into a wall? What happens to you specifically in the branch where you die? And his answer is where the nightmare begins. Part 4. The Machine That Only Clicks. The man was Max Tegmark, a Swedish-American physicist who, in the late 1990s, was at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, the same town where Everett had his sherry-fueled revelation 4 decades earlier. Tegmark is one of those rare physicists who is willing to chase an idea all the way to its most uncomfortable conclusion, and then describe that conclusion plainly, without softening it. In 1998 he published a paper with a wry title, asking whether quantum mechanics was about many worlds or merely many words, and inside that paper he laid out the sharpest, cleanest version of an argument that had been circulating informally among physicists for years. He gave it 2 names depending on which side of it you were looking at. From the outside he called it quantum suicide. From the inside he called it quantum immortality. And it is built deliberately like a machine, so let me build the machine for you piece by piece. Picture a device. At its core is a quantum measurement, the most genuinely random thing the universe offers. Tegmark imagined measuring the spin of a particle, which can come out one of 2 ways, with a clean 50-50 chance, and which is random in the deeper sense physics knows. Not random because we are ignorant, but random because the universe itself has not, on the old picture, decided. Now wire that measurement to a gun. The setup is brutal in its simplicity. Each time the trigger is pulled, the device measures the spin. If the spin comes out one way, the gun fires, and the person sitting in front of it dies instantly. If the spin comes out the other way, the gun merely clicks, harmlessly, and the person lives. 50-50, fire or click, death or life, decided by a single quantum coin flip, and then the person sits in front of this device and pulls the trigger again and again and again. Now, let us first ask what happens under the old, ordinary picture, the collapse picture, the one most people carry around without thinking about it. Under that picture, each pull of the trigger is a real coin flip with death on one side. Pull it once, and you have a 50% chance of dying. Pull it twice, and the chance you're still alive drops to 1 in 4. 10 pulls, and your survival odds are about 1 in 1,000. 20 pulls, about 1 in 1,000,000. The math is merciless and obvious. Keep pulling that trigger, and you will, with overwhelming and rapidly growing certainty, end up dead. Anyone watching would see exactly that. They would see you pull the trigger a few times, get lucky for a moment, and then, almost inevitably, the gun fires and you are gone. This is the sane, expected, ordinary result, and it is why no sane person would ever sit in that chair. But now Tegmark asks the question that turns the whole thing inside out. What happens under many worlds? Remember what many worlds says. There is no collapse. Every quantum measurement causes the world to branch. So when you pull the trigger and the device measures the spin, the world does not flip a coin. It splits. In one branch, the spin came out fatal, the gun fired, and that version of you is dead. In the other branch, the spin came out safe, the gun clicked, and that version of you is alive and sitting there, slightly rattled, ready to pull again. Both branches are real. Both happen. And here is the hinge of the entire argument, the single step on which everything turns. The version of you in the branch where the gun fired experiences nothing further. There is no one left in that branch to have any experience at all. That branch contains a body and a silence and grieving onlookers, but it does not contain a you. Your experience cannot continue there, because there is no longer a there for it to continue in. So follow only the branches in which there is still a living you to do the experiencing, because those are the only branches your experience can possibly occupy. In every one of those branches you heard a click. You survived. And then you pulled again, and again the world split, and again you can only find yourself in the branch where you heard a click. And again, and again. No matter how many times you pull that trigger, the version of you that is left to experience anything is always, necessarily, a version that heard the click. From your own first-person point of view, on the inside, you would experience an unbroken sequence of clicks stretching on without end. You would seem, to yourself, to be impossibly, miraculously, supernaturally lucky. You would seem to yourself to be unkillable. Tegmark's claim, stated at its starkest, is this: if many worlds is true, then you should expect, from your own subjective point of view, to always hear the click, to survive, every single time, forever. Let me put you in the chair, because this is one of those ideas you do not really understand until you feel it from the inside. You're sitting in front of the machine. It is wired to a single atom, and the behavior of that atom is as close to pure randomness as anything in the universe can be. In front of you is a switch. Each time you press it, the atom is measured, and a genuinely 50-50 quantum event decides whether the machine does nothing at all or ends you, instantly and without pain, in the time it takes a thought to half form. You rest your finger on the switch. You press it. A click. You're still here. Your pulse is going hard, but you are here. You press it again. A click. Again. Click. From where you sit in your chair, in your single unbroken stream of experience, nothing remarkable is happening at all. There is just a machine that keeps, for some reason, not going off. A run of luck. A very, very long run of luck. But step outside your chair for a moment and look at what the argument says is actually happening. With every press of that switch, the world divides, and in fully half of the new worlds created by each press, the chair is empty. The machine has done its work. There is a body slumped there, and a terrible silence, and perhaps someone in the doorway who has just watched you die. Those branches are as real as the one you are in. They are filling up, one after another, a whole expanding crowd of worlds in which you are dead. You never visit them. You cannot. You have no way to know they exist. The you that keeps pressing the switch and keeps hearing the click, 100 presses, 1,000 presses, is astronomically unlikely seen from the outside, almost impossibly rare. But from the inside it is not rare at all. From the inside it is simply the only experience there is, because it is the only branch with anyone left in it to have an experience, and so the clicks keep coming. The click that, by every ordinary expectation, should not keep coming. And it keeps coming, and it keeps coming. Now, I want to be very clear about something, and I am going to say it plainly because it matters more than anything else in this video. This thought experiment is not something anyone should ever attempt, in any form for any reason. It was never meant to be performed. Tegmark himself was emphatic about that. It is a device for exposing a hidden assumption, a tool for thinking, and nothing more. We are going to see before we are done exactly why it could never actually demonstrate what it claims to, and why the entire framing collapses under careful pressure. But for now, sit with the discomfort of it, because the discomfort is the point. The machine takes an assumption you carry around without ever examining it. The quiet, bone-level assumption that your experience is simply guaranteed to continue into the next moment, that there will always be a next moment from the inside, and it weaponizes that assumption and turns it into a claim about your own immortality. You feel the assumption now. You can feel that you expect, at some level beneath thought, to keep on experiencing. The machine asks, what if that expectation is not just a feeling, but a law? And here is the thing that makes the argument genuinely hard, the thing that separates it from ordinary science fiction nonsense. The gun is just a clean illustration, a laboratory cartoon of something the argument says is happening all the time, everywhere, with no machine required at all. Because your body, every cell of it, is built out of particles, and the particles obey quantum mechanics, and the difference between living and dying at any given instant comes down when you trace it all the way to the bottom, to the behavior of those particles. Whether a certain mutation fires in a certain cell, whether a clot forms or dissolves, whether one critical molecule binds to one critical receptor. If many worlds is true, then every one of those moments where your continued existence hangs in the balance is a moment where the world branches, and there is always some branch, however vanishingly improbable, in which the particles fall the way that keeps you alive. You can take the gun away entirely. The universe, the argument says, is already the machine. You are pressing the switch with every heartbeat, and you have been your whole life, and you always will. And so we arrive at the doorstep of the conclusion. Not a gun in a lab, but your actual life, your actual death, and a claim about both that I now have to let stand at its full and terrible height. Let me take you the last step. Part 5. The leap to your own life. So here is the argument, assembled, standing on its own feet, with nothing held back. I am going to give it to you straight, without any rebuttal, because you deserve to feel it the way the physicists who first thought it through felt it, before I start taking it apart. Take a breath. Here it is. The world branches at every quantum event. That is many worlds, and it may well be true, and it is held by serious physicists for good reasons. Your life and your death, traced down to the bottom, are quantum events, because everything is. At every instant when you might die, the world splits, and because death is just the failure of a physical system made of particles, there is always at least one branch, however improbable, in which the particles arrange themselves so that you survive that instant. Maybe the tumour does not form, maybe the pulse does not stop, maybe the car by the smallest quantum margin misses, and you, your conscious experience, the thing reading these words right now from the inside, can only ever find itself in a branch where it still exists, because a branch where you are dead contains no you to do the finding. Therefore your stream of experience can never, from the inside, come to an end. There is always a surviving branch, and your experience is always rooted into it, because that is the only place experience can go. You will watch others die. You will watch the improbable become your ordinary, but you, yourself, from the inside, will never reach the end. You cannot. The structure of the situation forbids it. That is quantum immortality. And I want you to notice what just happened to you, because it happens to nearly everyone who hears the argument laid out cleanly for the first time. You reached for the floor. Your mind, sensible and skeptical, went looking for the place where the trick is hidden, the obviously false step, the sleight of hand. And for a moment, you may not have found it. Each piece taken on its own seems to hold. Many worlds, respectable. Death as a physical process, true. Experience only occurring where there is an experiencer, almost tautologically true, and the conclusion just slides out of those pieces, smooth and cold, and sits there in front of you, and you cannot immediately knock it down. That moment, that brief, vertiginous moment where the floor goes soft and you genuinely cannot find the error, is the most important moment in this entire video. I want you to stay in it with me for a little while. I am not going to rescue you from it yet. Notice, while you are in it, that the dread does not feel like the dread of a fairy tale or a ghost story, the kind you can shake off by turning on a light. It feels colder than that, and more reasonable, and that is precisely what makes it land. A ghost story frightens you by asking you to believe something your reason rejects. This frightens you by building, brick by reasonable brick, from premises you already accepted, to a conclusion your reason cannot immediately throw out. You believed the equation works. You believed measurement is mysterious. You found many worlds at least respectable. You agreed that experience needs an experiencer, and now those ordinary sober agreements have carried you somewhere your whole being wants to refuse, and you cannot quite find the plank to pull up. That specific feeling, the feeling of being led by your own reason into a place that horrifies you, is rare and valuable, and most people go their whole lives without consciously having it. Stay in it a moment more. It is the feeling of a real intellectual trap, and the only way to truly escape a trap is to understand exactly how it was built, which is what we are about to do. The fear you feel right now is the measure of how good the trap is. It is also, as you will see, the measure of how completely it can be dismantled, because a trap built this precisely fails in ways just as precise. Sit with it. The idea is not that you will live forever in the way the old stories meant it, golden and young and gloriously alive. Read the argument again, and you will see it promises nothing of the kind. It does not say you will be healthy. It does not say you will be happy. It does not even say you will be whole. It says only this: whatever happens, there will be some branch in which you did not quite die, and your experience will be there, because it can be nowhere else. And once you see that clearly, the thing curdles in your hands. Because what kind of survival is that? Not the survival of the strong and the lucky, the survival of the barely hanging on, the survival of whatever thread of awareness is left when every ordinary exit has been taken away from you, and the only doors left open are the improbable, narrow, diminished ones. The argument does not offer you eternal life. It offers you the impossibility of death, which turns out, when you look at it closely, to be a very different and far more frightening thing. I called this the leap to your own life, and I want to dwell on the leap because it is doing enormous work and it deserves your attention. The gun was clean, a single 50-50 event, a clear binary, fire or click, dead or alive. The leap takes that clean cartoon and stretches it over the whole messy reality of an actual human life and an actual human death, and it asks you to believe that the same logic carries across. Hold on to that, because when we come to take the argument apart, this is one of the seams we are going to pull at. For now, just notice that the leap has been made smoothly, almost invisibly, and that the conclusion you are sitting with depends on it entirely. The argument needs your death to behave like the gun. It needs there to always be a clean surviving branch, a click instead of a fire, at every lethal instant. We will ask later whether real death is anything like that. But the argument assumes it is, and on that assumption the immortality conclusion stands. There is a name forming for what the argument actually preserves, and I want to plant it now, gently, because we're going to return to it and let it grow into something sharp. What the argument roots forward, branch after branch, is not really you in the full sense, the whole person with a life and relationships and a future. It is something thinner than that, a flicker of bare awareness, a single surviving strand, threading through the narrowest gaps the universe leaves open. The argument promises the continuation of a thread, not a person. Say that to yourself and let it sit there, half-formed, a thread, not a person. Right now it is just a phrase. By the time we have finished taking the argument apart, it is going to mean something you cannot unsee. And let me be honest with you about the emotional shape of this, because I think pretending otherwise would be a kind of lie. Some people, when they first encounter quantum immortality, find it comforting. They think, oh, then I never really die, and they feel a kind of relief. I understand the impulse, but I think that relief does not survive contact with the actual content of the argument. Because the argument, taken seriously, is not a promise of heaven. It is a sentence of a particular kind of endlessness, in which you are routed forever into surviving branches without any guarantee about the quality of that survival, while everything that gave your existence its meaning and its texture falls away around you. If the argument were true, the merciful thing the universe could do would be to let you finally stop, and the argument says it never will. That is why the title of this video calls it a nightmare and not a gift. The horror is not that the argument might be false. The horror is the shape of the world it describes, if it were true. So we have built the machine, and we have set it loose on your own life, and we have let the conclusion stand at its full height, undefended, the way it deserves to be confronted, And before I start to take it apart, I want to do one more thing, because I think this idea has been too abstract for too long, and abstraction can be a way of keeping a frightening thing at arm's length. I want to tell you about the man who made all of this possible, the man whose single act of subtraction, deleting the collapse, opened the door that Tegmark later walked through. Because Hugh Everett III did not just propose a theory. He lived a life shaped by the world that the theory was met with, a life with a real and quiet sorrow in it, and a death, and a family touched by the strangest grief. And I think you cannot fully understand what it means to take this idea seriously until you have sat for a moment with the people who took it most seriously of all. So let me leave the machine for a little while and tell you about a young man and his sherry and the cold reception that followed and what became of him and the people he left behind. Part 6. The Man Who Built the Branches. Hugh Everett III finished his doctoral thesis at Princeton in 1956 and submitted the final version in early 1957, and in it he laid out the relative state formulation, the idea we now call many worlds. He was in his mid-20s. He believed with the clear-eyed confidence of a young man who has seen something true that he had solved one of the deepest problems in physics, the measurement problem, and that he had done it cleanly by subtraction, by trusting the equation and refusing to add a miracle. And in a sense, he was right. His idea is, by the standards I described earlier, one of the most economical solutions ever proposed. But being right, in physics as in life, is not the same as being believed. The reception was cold. The towering figure of quantum physics at the time was Niels Bohr in Copenhagen, the architect of the very interpretation Everett was trying to replace. And Bohr's circle did not take kindly to a graduate student suggesting that the whole edifice of collapse was unnecessary, that the universe was constantly splitting into uncountable parallel copies. Everett's advisor, John Wheeler, who genuinely admired the work and could see its power, was also caught between his brilliant student and the establishment he respected, and he pushed Everett to soften the language, to tone down the radical claims, to make it palatable. The published version of the thesis was trimmed and gentled from what Everett had originally written. Everett even travelled to Copenhagen in 1959 to discuss his ideas in person, hoping, perhaps, to win them over. The visit was a failure. Bohr's group was unmoved. One of them later described Everett in a private letter in terms that amounted to calling him hopelessly naive about physics. The young man who thought he had solved the measurement problem was in effect told to go away, and so he did. This is the part of the story that I find genuinely sad and worth pausing on. Hugh Everett, faced with an idea he believed in, and a physics community that would not have it, simply left physics. He did not spend decades fighting for his interpretation in the journals. He walked away from academic research almost entirely, and went to work for the defence establishment, applying his formidable mathematical talent to the cold calculus of nuclear weapons strategy and operations research, the mathematics of how wars might be fought and how many might die. He was, by accounts, very good at it. He made money. He lived what looked, from the outside, like a successful life. But the idea he had given the world sat almost entirely ignored for more than a decade, until Bryce DeWitt resurrected it in 1970 and gave it the name Many Worlds, and even then Everett remained on the margins of the field he had hoped to transform. He was invited late to give a few talks as interest revived, but he never came back to physics in any real way. The door he had opened, he left to others to walk through. Everett's personal life carried its own weight of difficulty. He was, by the accounts of those who knew him, a heavy smoker and a heavy drinker, often emotionally distant from his family, a man who lived a great deal inside his own formidable mind. He believed, fittingly, and perhaps poignantly, in his own theory. He believed that every possible version of events was real, that somewhere the branches he did not inhabit were playing out in full. There is a story, which his son later told, that Everett held a private and idiosyncratic kind of comfort in the idea, a sense that in some branch things had gone otherwise. In 1982, Hugh Everett III died of a sudden cardiac arrest. He was 51 years old. He had asked, in keeping with his unsentimental nature, that his remains be disposed of without ceremony, and his wishes were, after a time, carried out in a manner as stark as the request. The man who had populated reality with uncountable copies of every person wanted for himself no marker and no fuss. But the story does not end with Everett, and the part that comes next is the part that I find almost unbearably human, and I'm going to tell it carefully, because it deserves care. Everett had 2 children, a son named Mark and a daughter named Elizabeth. The son, Mark Oliver Everett, would go on to become a musician of real accomplishment, the frontman of a well-known band, and he would later make a moving documentary about trying to understand the distant, brilliant father he had barely known. But it is the daughter, Elizabeth, that I want to tell you about. Elizabeth Everett struggled for years with serious mental illness, with a pain that the people who loved her could not reach, and in 1996, 14 years after her father's death, Elizabeth took her own life. She left a note. And in that note, according to what her brother has shared, she wrote that she was going to a parallel universe to be with her father. She asked that her remains be discarded with the trash, the same way her father's had been, because she wrote, that way she might end up in the right parallel universe. I want to sit here for a moment, quietly, because this is the place where the abstraction we have been building, the branches and the wave functions and the elegant subtraction of the collapse, touches a real and terrible human grief. Here was a daughter, in unbearable pain, who took her father's grand idea, the idea that every possibility is real, that somewhere the branches we did not live are still alive, and folded it into her own suffering and found in it a doorway. She did not experience many worlds as a physicist's puzzle. She experienced it as a promise, a place where her father still was, a branch she might reach. The interpretation that began as an act of cold logic, as a young man's refusal to add a miracle, ended up, decades later, as the shape of a dying woman's last hope. There is a terrible irony in it that I do not want to pass over too quickly. The whole point of Everett's idea, the reason it was beautiful, was that it removed the mysterious, the magical, the consoling, and left only the bare honesty of the equation. He took the miracle out of physics, and yet the idea he built, stripped of every comfort, came back around in the hands of people in pain and offered itself as exactly the kind of comfort he had worked to banish. A doorway to a place where the lost are not lost, where the branches we grieve are still somehow alive. That is not a flaw in his physics. It is a fact about us, about how badly we want there to be another room, and how readily we will read one into even the coldest description of the world. Hold on to that, because it is the same wanting the immortality argument feeds on, and naming it clearly is the first step towards setting it down. I do not tell you this to frighten you, and I want to be clear, gently and firmly, that the idea offers no such doorway, that this was the reasoning of someone in profound pain, and not a conclusion the physics supports. I tell you this because I think you cannot understand what it means to take quantum immortality seriously without understanding that real people have, and that it has cost them. The argument is not a toy. It has a human history, and that history has sorrow in it. There is something I need you to take from this beat and carry into what comes next, because it is going to matter. The many worlds interpretation is real physics, and it may be true, and we will treat it with the respect it has earned. But the immortality argument that some people build on top of it is a different thing, and the gap between the two is exactly the space where suffering can creep in. Elizabeth Everett did not die because the physics says we are immortal. The physics does not say that, as we are about to see in detail. She died because she was in pain and reached for the only comfort she could find, and the idea was there, half understood, offering a doorway it cannot actually open. And so, when we turn now, finally, to take the argument apart, I want you to understand that this is not an idle intellectual exercise. Showing exactly where and why the immortality argument fails is not just good physics. It is, in a real sense, a kind of care. Because the people most vulnerable to this idea are the ones who most need to understand clearly and completely that it does not deliver what it seems to promise. So let us begin the dismantling. Let us find the first crack. And it is hiding, as so many things in this story are, inside a single rule about probability that we have already met and walked past and not yet understood. Part 7. The first crack, where not all worlds weigh the same. When I walked you through many worlds, I told you that the universe branches at every quantum event, that every outcome happens, each in its own real branch. That is true, as far as it goes. But I left something out deliberately because the argument needs you not to think about it too hard, and now is the time to put it back in. The thing I left out is the single most important and most precisely tested fact in all of quantum mechanics. The branches are not all equally probable. They do not all weigh the same. Go back to the wave function, the object that describes a quantum system as a mixture of possibilities. When the wave function spreads across several outcomes, it does not just list them. It assigns each one a number, an amount, a kind of weight, which physicists call its amplitude. And the rule for turning those amplitudes into probabilities is the rule we met all the way back at the beginning, the Born rule, discovered by Max Born in 1926. The Born rule says the probability of any outcome is the square of its amplitude. This is not a minor technical footnote. This is the rule. This is the part of quantum mechanics that makes it the most accurate theory ever built. Every prediction that has ever been confirmed to one part in a trillion, every triumph of the theory, comes from the Born rule telling us how likely each outcome is. Take away the Born rule and quantum mechanics stops being a science and becomes a vague story about things that might happen. The Born rule is where all the predictive power lives. Now watch what it means for the branches. A branch in which something extremely improbable happens, say, a branch in which a trillion coin flips all come up heads, is a real branch. Yes, it exists in the many worlds picture. But it carries a vanishingly tiny weight. Its amplitude, squared, is almost nothing. And here is the question that breaks the immortality argument. When we ask what you should expect to experience, do we count branches by whether they exist, or do we count them by their weight? Because the immortality argument quietly, without ever announcing it, counts branches by mere existence. It says, there exists a surviving branch, therefore your experience goes there. It treats a branch with a weight of almost nothing exactly the same as a branch with a weight of nearly 1. It throws the Born rule in the garbage, and you cannot do that. You cannot keep the part of quantum mechanics that motivates the argument, the branching, and throw away the part of quantum mechanics that makes it a science, the weighting. They come together or not at all. If many worlds is true, then the right way to think about your future experiences, the only way that is consistent with everything we know about how quantum mechanics actually predicts the world, is to weight each future version of you by the Born measure, by the squared amplitude of its branch. And the moment you do that, the moment you put the weights back in, the miracle evaporates. Because the branches in which you survive some lethal catastrophe by an absurd quantum fluke are exactly the branches with almost no weight. They are the trillion heads in a row branches. They exist, but they are featherweight, gossamer, almost nothing. And the branches in which you die, ordinary on schedule, like every human who has ever lived, are the heavy ones, the ones that carry essentially all the weight. So when you ask, weighting properly, what should I expect to experience, the answer comes back the same as it always was. You should expect to die, overwhelmingly. The ordinary ending, the heavy branch, is where almost all of your expected experience goes. Let me make the weighting concrete, because it is easy to nod along to the words and still not feel why it is decisive. Imagine a lottery with 100 million tickets, and you hold exactly 1. In the many worlds picture, when the drawing happens, the world branches into 100 million branches, and in one of them, your ticket wins. That winning branch is real. It exists. A version of you is, right now, in some branch celebrating. But would you say, before the drawing, that you should expect to win simply because a winning branch will exist? Of course not. You would say your chance is 1 in 100 million, which is to say, you should overwhelmingly expect to lose, because the losing branches carry essentially all the weight. The existence of a winning branch does not make winning your expected experience. Everyone understands this perfectly when it comes to lotteries. The immortality argument is the same error, dressed up in the language of life and death. It points at the surviving branch, the winning ticket, and says, look, it exists, therefore your experience goes there. But a branch existing and a branch being where you should expect to find yourself are two completely different things, and the gap between them is exactly the born rule, the same rule that tells you not to quit your job over a lottery ticket. The surviving branches in the immortality argument are not even 1 in 100 million. They are one in numbers so large they have no names. To expect to find yourself there is not optimism. It is a misunderstanding of what expectation means. This is the central technical reason most physicists who have thought hard about quantum immortality reject it, and I want you to see why it is so devastating, and not just a quibble. The argument tried to have it both ways. It invoked the authority of quantum mechanics, the most successful theory ever, to claim that the branches are real. Good. But then it ignored the one rule, the born rule, that gives quantum mechanics that authority in the first place. It is like a man who insists you respect the verdict of a court because courts are reliable, and then asks you to ignore all the evidence the court actually heard. You do not get to borrow the credibility of quantum mechanics for the branching, and then discard quantum mechanics for the probabilities. Keep the whole theory or none of it. And the whole theory, the theory that includes the born rule, says that your experience, properly weighted, runs almost entirely into the branches where you die like everyone else. Now, I have to be fair, because this is genuinely subtle, and the defenders of the argument do not simply roll over here. The notion of probability in a many-worlds universe is genuinely strange and genuinely contested. If every outcome happens, what does it even mean to say one outcome is more probable than another? There is a serious, ongoing philosophical project, pursued by careful thinkers like David Deutsch and David Wallace, to make sense of why a rational person in a branching universe should still bet according to the born rule, should still treat the high-weight branches as the ones to expect. The details get technical, involving decision theory and what it means to be rational when you know you are about to be copied. But here is the thing. Every serious attempt to make probability coherent in many worlds ends up reinforcing the born rule, not abolishing it. None of them give you a version of probability in which the existence of a flyweight surviving branch means you should expect to find yourself there. The hard work of making many worlds a consistent, livable theory all points the same direction, away from immortality. The argument survives only by refusing to do that hard work, by stopping at the naive picture of branches as a simple list, and never asking how much each one weighs. So here is the first crack, and it is a profound one. What the immortality argument actually preserves, once you put the born rule back where it belongs, is not your future in any meaningful sense. It is a set of branches so improbable, so close to weightless, that to call them your expected experience is to misuse the word expected entirely. Remember the phrase I planted earlier, the one I said would grow into something sharp, a thread, not a person. Here is where it starts to bite. Even granting the branching universe in full, what the argument roots forward is not a person with a future. It is a thread of awareness so thin, so improbable, weighted so close to zero, that it barely deserves to be called a continuation at all. It is the gossamer branch, the trillion-head strand, the thing that exists but weighs nothing. Survival of that kind is not survival you would have any reason to want, or any rational reason to expect. It is a thread, and a vanishing one. And we have only found the first crack. The second one does not come from the mathematics of probability at all. It comes from the simple, biological, bodily fact of how human beings actually die. Because the gun, it turns out, lied to you about death, and we are going to see exactly how. Part 8. The second crack, where death has no clean switch. The gun was a clean machine, and that cleanliness was a trick. Look again at how it was built. A single quantum measurement, a clean 50-50, and then, in one instant, one of two perfectly defined outcomes. Fire or click, dead or alive. A sharp binary switch flipped by a single quantum event, with no in-between and no ambiguity. The whole force of the immortality argument depends on death looking like that. It needs there to be, at each lethal moment, a clean fork in the branches, one tidy branch where you're simply dead, and one tidy branch where you're simply holy, fine. The argument needs your death to be a switch. And here is the second crack, and it is enormous, and it requires no advanced physics at all to understand, only honesty about the body you live in. Real death is almost never a switch. Real death is a slow, distributed, gradual failure, and that difference destroys the argument. Think about how people actually die. Most deaths are not the flipping of a single quantum coin. Aging is the gradual accumulating failure of trillions of cells, the slow fraying of countless systems over years and decades, no single one of which is a clean quantum event. Disease is a cascade, one failure leading to another, a process that unfolds over weeks or months, governed overwhelmingly by the ordinary large-scale classical behavior of cells and tissues and organs, not by the flip of one particle's spin. Even the deaths that seem sudden, a stroke, a cardiac arrest, are not single quantum events. They are the macroscopic collapse of an enormous, complicated, redundant biological machine, billions upon billions of cells losing oxygen together, a wave of failure spreading through tissue. There is no single particle, no one quantum measurement whose outcome cleanly decides whether you live or die. There is no switch for the branching to fork around. So what does the many worlds picture actually say about a real death, an honest death, the kind that waits for all of us? It says that yes, of course, the body's made of particles, and yes, there are quantum events woven all through the process of dying, and yes, technically the world is branching the whole time. But the branches do not divide into one tidy dead you and one tidy fine you. The overwhelming bulk of the branches lead to death, on roughly the schedule biology dictates, because death by this point is a large-scale, mostly classical process that quantum flukes are powerless to reverse. And the rare branches where you do not die in a given moment are not branches where you're suddenly fine. They are branches where you survived, barely, partially, with the failing systems failing slightly more slowly, with just enough still working to keep a flicker of awareness going. The gun promised a clean click, a return to full life. Biology offers no such thing. Biology offers a dimmer dial, not a switch. And a dimmer dial does not deliver immortality. It delivers something far worse. It delivers an endless, thinning twilight in which you do not die, but you do not exactly live either, routed always into whatever narrowing corridor still holds a spark of experience. And consider how the odds tilt as the survival gets more extreme, because this is the part that turns the twilight from sad to genuinely horrifying. The argument needs a branch where you survive, and at first, early in a life, those branches are not so rare or so strange. But push the survival far enough, past the age any human has ever reached, past the failure of system after system, and the only branches left in which a flicker of you continues are branches of escalating improbability and escalating damage. To survive what should be unsurvivable, more and more has to go impossibly right, and the versions in which everything goes right enough to keep you whole become rarer and rarer compared to the versions in which just barely enough goes right to keep you technically present. So as the centuries pile up, if you could pile up centuries, the experience that the argument roots you into is not just diminished, it is selected, again and again, for the most marginal possible survival, the thinnest possible thread, the least that still counts as awareness. The argument does not carry you forward into better and better luck. It carries you forward into worse and worse states that merely fail by the narrowest margin to be death. That is the shape of the corridor. It does not just narrow, it narrows in a way that guarantees the version of you at the far end is the most broken version that still, by some technicality, has not stopped. Let me take you there, gently, because this is the place where the dream the argument sells becomes the nightmare the title names, and I want you to feel the difference. Let me show you what the argument's promise actually looks like from the inside. You did not die. You should have. The thing that came for you was the kind of thing that ends a life, and in the overwhelming weight of the branches it ended yours. But there was a branch, a thin one, where it did not quite finish, and your awareness is here, because here is the only place it could be. So open your eyes in this branch where you survived. There is a dimness to everything now. Perhaps a room, machines, the particular quiet of a place where bodies are kept going. Perhaps not even that much. You survived, but the branch in which you survived a thing that should have killed you is not the branch in which you survived intact. It is the branch in which just enough kept working. Your body is less than it was. Your thoughts move more slowly now, or they move in pieces, arriving out of order, slipping away before you can hold them. You reach for a word, a simple one, the name of someone you love, and it is not there. There is a space where it used to be. You're still, technically, exactly what the argument promised would continue. You are the experiencer, persisting, routed into the surviving branch. But what is persisting is less than it was, and the next time the dimmer dial turns, it will be less still, and the time after that, less again, narrowing and narrowing without ever quite reaching zero, because zero is the one place the argument says your experience can never go. The argument promised you would never reach the end. Notice that it never promised the road would stay wide. It never promised you would arrive anywhere worth being. It said only that the experience would continue and continue and continue, threading always into whatever diminished, improbable corridor still contained a trace of awareness. That is the immortality the physics actually implies if you take the argument seriously and you are honest about how bodies fail. Not life everlasting, the refusal of death, stripped of everything that ever made survival worth wanting. And I think, if you sit with it honestly, you will agree that the thing people fear about death, the ending, is not nearly as frightening as this. The ending at least is complete. The ending lets the story finish. What the argument describes is a story that is forbidden to finish, a thinning forever, and there is no mercy in it at all. So that is the second crack, and notice that it does not even need the first. Forget the born rule for a moment. Even if you granted the argument every branch, weighted or not, the biology alone defeats the comforting version of it, because the surviving branches are not the ones the gun promised. They are the dimmer dial branches, the barely hanging on branches, the long twilight. The clean click was a fiction the cartoon machine smuggled in. Real death has no clean click, and we are not done, because there is a third cruelty hidden in the argument, quieter than the first two, and in some ways the saddest of all. It is not about probability, and it is not about the body. It is about the people in the room with you, and the particular loneliness of being the one who never leaves. Part 9. The Loneliness Clause. Set aside, for the length of this part, both cracks we have found. Pretend, for the sake of argument, that the probability problem did not exist and the biology problem did not exist, that the argument worked exactly as advertised, and your experience really would thread forever into surviving branches. Grant it all. There is still something buried in the argument that almost no one notices at first, and once you see it, it casts a shadow over the whole fantasy. It is this. The argument roots your experience into surviving branches. It says nothing at all, about rooting anyone else's. Think about what that means, carefully. The argument works for you because your experience can only occur where you survive, So from your point of view, you are always in a branch where you made it. But the people you love are not you. Their experience is their own, threading through their own branches. And in the particular branch where you happen to survive, there is no reason at all for them to have survived too. The quantum fluke that kept you alive said nothing about them. So in the branch where you live, they die, on their own ordinary schedules, the way everyone dies, and you are left there, in that branch, having survived them. And then the next time death comes for you, you survive again, into another branch, and anyone still left in your life dies in that one too. Eventually, you become the one fixed point in a world that keeps emptying out around you. Every single relationship you will ever have ends the same way, with them gone and you remaining. Forever. This is the loneliness clause, and it is the cruelest fine print in the whole contract. Because the thing that makes a long life bearable, the only thing really, is that other people are in it with you. The whole texture of a human life, the reason any of it means anything, is woven out of other people, the ones who share your history, who remember the same things you remember, who knew you when. And the immortality the argument offers is precisely, structurally, guaranteed to strip all of that away, over and over without end. It is not a shared eternity. It cannot be. It is the most private eternity imaginable, a single thread of awareness threading on alone, while everyone it ever loved falls away behind it, branch after branch after branch. Let me show you what that solitude actually feels like, because I think it is the part of this that lingers longest in the dark. You survived again. The thing that should have ended you did not, and your awareness carried forward into a branch where you are still here. But the branch your survival carried you into is not the branch your life was built in. It diverged somewhere back at some fork you never noticed, and the path you're on now has drifted far from the one your history belongs to. The people around you wear faces you almost recognize. They know your name, but the warmth is not quite right. The shared memories do not quite line up. The inside jokes land a half-second wrong, because the history you carry belonged to a slightly different version of events, a branch that is no longer the one you are standing in. And here is the thing that undoes you. Somewhere, these people are mourning. They are grieving a version of you, or grieving the person you would have been to them in the branch they remember. And the one they are mourning is sitting right here, wearing your face, breathing. A stranger sharing a name with their grief. You reach for them, and the reaching does not close the distance. To survive everything, it turns out, is to become, in the end, the only one who remembers the world the way you actually lived it. Everyone who could have confirmed your history is gone, or was never quite here, and you're left holding a life that no one else can vouch for, alone in a crowd of familiar strangers, for as long as the branches keep forking, which is to say, without end. I want to name the specific shape of this horror, because it is different from the others and it deserves its own name. The first crack was about mathematics, the weightlessness of the surviving branches. The second crack was about the body, the thinning twilight of damaged survival. This third one is about meaning, about the social fabric that makes a self-worth being. Whatever you fear about death, and most of us fear, somewhere underneath, the idea of being forgotten, of the world closing over the space where we were, the argument takes that fear and turns it precisely inside out into something worse. You will not be forgotten, because you will never be gone. You will be the one doing the forgetting, the one watching everyone else be forgotten, the one outlasting every person who could have remembered you, again and again, alone. That is not a consolation. There is no version of it that is a consolation. It is the loneliest idea I know, and there is a particular detail of it that I cannot stop turning over. In an ordinary long life, even a very long one, the loneliness of outliving people has an end, because you too eventually reach your own ending and are spared the rest. The grief of the survivor is real, but it is finite, bounded by the survivor's own mortality. The immortality the argument describes removes even that mercy. There is no point at which you, too, get to stop and rest from the watching. The losses do not accumulate toward any horizon. They simply continue, one after another, with no final loss that closes the account, because the one thing that can never happen on this picture is the loss of you. So you become not just the last to remember any given world, but the permanent mourner, the one for whom grief has no exit, the one condition in all of reality that is structurally forbidden from ever being comforted by its own ending. That is a kind of solitude the human mind was never built to hold, and the fact that the argument offers it as a consolation tells you how badly the argument has misunderstood what we actually are. And I think this is the moment to step back and notice the overall shape of what we have found, because 3 cracks in, the comforting version of quantum immortality is already in ruins. Weight the branches properly, and your expected experience runs into ordinary death. Be honest about biology, and the surviving branches are a thinning twilight, not a restoration. And even granting the whole thing, the survival it offers is a solitary confinement without end, every relationship dissolving the same way forever. The argument has not survived contact with probability, with the body, or with the core of what makes a life a life. And yet, I have saved the deepest crack for last, because the 3 we have found, devastating as they are, all still take one thing for granted. They all still assume there is a definite you, a single, continuous self, whose fate we are arguing about. The probability crack asked what you should expect. The biology crack asked what you would experience. The loneliness crack asked what you would be left with. All 3 assumed there is a you to do the expecting and the experiencing and the being left. The 4th crack pulls that assumption out from under everything, because it turns out that the you the whole argument was built to preserve was never, on close inspection, the kind of thing that could be preserved at all. It was never a single thread. And to see why, we have to set the physics down for a little while and pick up a question older than quantum mechanics, older than the gun, a question that human beings have been circling for thousands of years. What, exactly, is a self? Part 10, the 3rd crack, where there was never a single you. The whole immortality argument rests on a phrase so natural that you've probably never questioned it. The phrase is, your experience must continue somewhere. It assumes there is a definite you, a single thing, whose experience is the experience in question, whose continuation we are tracking from branch to branch. And this assumption feels unshakable, because from the inside, the sense of being a single continuous self is the most solid thing you know. You wake up each morning and you are obviously the same person who went to sleep. You remember being a child and it feels like that was you. There is one you, threading through time, and the argument simply asks where that one you goes when the branches fork. But here is the deepest crack of all, and it was being probed by careful thinkers for centuries before anyone dreamed of quantum mechanics. The single, continuous self that the argument is trying to preserve may never have existed in the first place, and if it does not exist, the argument is not just wrong. It is asking a question that has no answer. Let me take you back almost 300 years to the 1730s and to a young Scottish philosopher named David Hume. Hume did something simple and radical. He went looking, by introspection, for the self. He turned his attention inward and tried to find the thing, the I, the continuous self that supposedly owns all his experiences, and he reported honestly that he could not find it. When he looked inward, he found only experiences, a perception of warmth, a flash of colour, a thought, a feeling, one after another, a procession of passing mental events. But the self that was supposedly having them, the thing over and above the experiences that owned them and persisted through them, he could never catch. There was the seeing, but no separate seer to be found. There was the thinking, but no separate thinker, only more thoughts. Hume concluded that what we call the self is not a thing at all. It is a bundle of perceptions, tied together by memory and resemblance, and the habit of running into one another, but with no underlying continuous substance holding it all up. The self, Hume said, is something the mind constructs, not something the mind finds. Now leap forward to the 1980s, to the British philosopher Derek Parfit, who took Hume's insight and pushed it into territory so strange it reads like science fiction. Decades before quantum branching forced physicists to confront the same questions. Parfit asked you to imagine a teleporter, the kind from the stories, that scans your body, records the exact position of every atom, destroys the original, and reconstructs a perfect copy somewhere else from new matter. Is the person who steps out the same person who stepped in? Most people hesitate, and then Parfit twists the knife. Suppose the machine malfunctions and does not destroy the original, so now there are two of you, both with all your memories, both certain they are the real you, both right that they were the person who stepped in. Which one is really you? Parfit's answer, argued with relentless care in his book in 1984, is that the question has no answer, because it was the wrong question all along. There is no hidden further fact about which one is really you. There is only psychological continuity, the ordinary connectedness of memory and personality and intention, and that continuity can branch, can split, can come in degrees. The word identity, Parfit argued, was never tracking the hidden metaphysical thing we imagined. When you press hard on cases of branching, the notion of a single continuing self simply dissolves in your hands. And here is the ancient version of the same puzzle, older than both of them, old enough to have a name from antiquity, the ship of Theseus. A ship is preserved in a harbour as a monument, and over the years its planks rot and are replaced one by one until not a single original plank remains. Is it still the same ship? And if someone gathered all the discarded original planks and reassembled them, which one is the real ship of Theseus, the restored one in the harbour or the reassembled one from the old wood? For thousands of years people have argued about this, and the lesson, finally, is that there is no fact of the matter to be discovered. There is only a choice about how we use the word same. The ship does not contain, somewhere inside it, a fact about its own true identity. Identity, for ships and for selves, turns out to be a convenient way of talking, not a fundamental feature of reality. Now bring all of that back to quantum mechanics, and watch what it does to the immortality argument. Many worlds does not just permit the branching of the self, it makes it literal, constant, and inescapable. Every time a quantum event resolves, and your brain, being a physical system, is entangled in countless such events every instant, you split into branches, each containing a complete version of you with all your memories up to the moment of the split. And here is the killing point. There is no fact about which one is the real continuation of you. They both are. They both have your past. They both feel, from the inside, like the genuine, seamless, obvious continuation of the person you were a moment ago. Parfit's malfunctioning teleporter is not a thought experiment in the many worlds picture. It is happening to you continuously, billions of times a second, splitting you into a fan of equally legitimate successors, none of which has any privileged claim to be the one true you. So when the immortality argument says your experience must continue in a surviving branch, it is leaning, with its full weight, on a notion of yore that was already incoherent before the quantum mechanics even arrived. There is no single thread to be preserved, because there was never a single thread to begin with. There is a constantly dividing fan of momentary experiences, each one inheriting the memories of the last and therefore feeling continuous, but with no deeper thing connecting them than that inheritance of memory. The feeling of being a single continuous self is exactly that, a feeling, a story the brain assembles moment to moment by stitching the present to the remembered past. It is a remarkably convincing story. It is the most convincing story there is. But it is a story, not a thing, and the moment you go looking for the solid, continuous self underneath it, you find, just as Hume found, that there is nothing there to catch. And now the phrase I planted long ago can finally land with its full weight. A thread, not a person. I first used it to describe what survives the born rule, a strand of awareness too thin and too improbable to want. But now it means something deeper and stranger. Even that thin surviving thread is not the thing the argument promised to save. The argument set out to preserve you, the continuous self, the person. And it turns out that the person was always a thread, in the deepest sense, always a story stitched together moment to moment, never the solid, continuous substance we imagined we were. There is no you that persists from branch to branch, because there was no single you persisting from moment to moment in the first place, not in the way we believed. The argument was built to rescue something that, on inspection, was never the kind of thing that could be rescued, because it was never the kind of thing that fully existed. A thread, not a person. Even the thread is not the thing you thought you were protecting. I know this is vertiginous. I know that of everything we have said tonight, this is the part that does not sit easily, because it does not just dismantle the immortality argument, it reaches in and unsettles the thing you are most certain of, the bedrock sense that you are a single self moving through time. So let me say clearly what I am and am not claiming. I am not saying you do not exist, or that your life and your experiences are not real, or that the people you love are illusions. Of course they are real. The experiences are real, the memories are real, the love is real. What I am saying is narrower and stranger. The thing the immortality argument treats as a simple, given, single object, the continuous you whose endless survival it promises, is not the simple given object it pretends. It is a process, a pattern, a story, something far more interesting and far less solid than a thread running through eternity. And once you see that, the argument loses its grip entirely, because there is no single thread for the branches to carry forward. The question, where does my experience go, has the same status as the question which is the real ship of Theseus. It feels like it must have an answer. It does not. And I want to add one more turn of this screw, because it is the turn that makes the quantum version genuinely worse than anything Hume or Parfit faced. They could at least imagine that, in our ordinary single-track world, the branching cases were exotic, rare, thought experiments you would probably never confront in real life. But many worlds removes even that comfort. If the interpretation is correct, the branching is not exotic and not rare. It is the constant, ceaseless, ordinary condition of your existence, happening faster than you can think, every second of every day, splitting you into countless equally real successors before you have finished reading the sentence. The teleporter that troubled Parfit is running on you continuously, and it never malfunctions, because the malfunction, the making of two of you, is simply what it always does. So the question the immortality argument leans on, the question of which future experiencer is the real you, is not a rare puzzle you might face on some strange day. It is being answered, or rather refused, billions of times a second right now, and the answer is always the same. None of them is the one true continuation, because there is no one true continuation, because that was never how any of it worked. The self you are defending against death was being copied and divided long before death was ever on the table, and you never noticed, and it never mattered, and that, strangely, is the first hint of where the peace at the end of all this is going to come from. That is the third crack, the deepest one, and it would be enough on its own. But there is a fourth, and it is different in kind from the others, because it does not say the argument is false. It says something more damning. It says the argument can never, even in principle, be tested, that there is no possible observation anyone could ever make that would confirm it, and that this places it outside science altogether. And tangled up with that fourth crack is a thicket of claims that circulate online, claims that quantum immortality has been proven, that near-death experiences are evidence for it, that the Mandela effect is branches leaking into one another, that the whole thing means death is not real. We are going to walk through every one of those, and we are going to use the very physics we have built tonight to take each of them apart. Because the same fact that makes the branches real is the fact that seals them away from each other forever, and that single fact, once you understand it, dissolves both the argument and nearly every myth that has grown up around it. The branches never touch. We planted that phrase long ago. It is time to see what it really means. Part 11. The fourth crack, where nothing can ever be proven. Imagine someone decides to test quantum immortality directly. They build the machine, the gun wired to a quantum coin, and they sit down in the chair, determined to prove the theory by surviving an impossible streak. Let us say they pull the trigger 50 times and live. From the inside, they are now convinced. 50 survivals, when the odds of surviving even 10 were 1 in 1,000, the odds of surviving 50 around 1 in a quadrillion. Surely, they think, this proves I am being routed into surviving branches. Surely this is the demonstration. And here is the first problem, the one that should stop them cold. From the inside, surviving 50 pulls by quantum immortality is completely indistinguishable from surviving 50 pulls by ordinary dumb luck. There is no felt difference. A person who is genuinely immortal and a person who is merely the 1 in a quadrillion lucky soul in this particular branch experience exactly the same thing, an unbroken run of clicks. The streak proves nothing, even to the person living it, because luck and immortality feel identical from the chair. There is no internal evidence to be had. But it is worse than that, and this is where the physics we built tonight does its sharpest work. Think about what the experiment looks like from the outside to everyone else. Remember the Born rule. In the overwhelming weight of the branches, the experimenter dies quickly, just as the ordinary picture predicts. So in almost every branch, the people watching see exactly what you would expect. A person who sat down at a machine and was killed by it. Only in a vanishingly tiny, weightless sliver of branches does anyone observe a survivor. So no matter how the experiment comes out, it can never produce evidence that the scientific community could accept. Because in the overwhelming majority of branches, including the ones carrying essentially all the probability weight, the result is a dead experimenter and a tragedy, and nothing learned. There is no way to publish it, no way to share it, no way to convince anyone who was not in your specific featherweight branch, and even they, as we just saw, cannot tell immortality from luck. The experiment is structurally incapable of generating evidence. It fails not because it is hard to do, but because the very structure of the situation forbids any observation from ever confirming the claim. And that is the fourth crack, the one that matters most for whether this is science at all. A claim that no possible observation could ever confirm, that is in principle untestable by anyone, is not a scientific claim. It is something else, a philosophical position, a story, a faith, but not a piece of physics, because physics lives or dies by the possibility of being checked against the world. Quantum immortality, by its own internal logic, can never be checked against the world. And notice, crucially, where this untestability comes from. It comes from the very same fact that made many worlds livable in the first place. It comes from decoherence. The branches never touch. We planted that phrase parts ago, when I told you that decoherence seals each branch into its own private reality, with no doors and no windows to the others. That sealing is what makes the world look classical and single to us, which is what made many worlds a respectable theory rather than an obvious absurdity. But that same sealing is exactly what makes the immortality argument impossible to test. The branches where you survived cannot send word to the branches where you died. The branches where the experimenter lived cannot reach the branches where the community watched them die. The seal that makes many worlds work is the seal that keeps the argument out of science. The branches never touch, and because they never touch, the claim can never be confirmed, and because it can never be confirmed, it is not physics. The same fact, doing both jobs. That is the kind of structural elegance that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. I want to press on this a moment longer, because there is a temptation to think that untestable just means hard to test, that maybe a cleverer experiment or a better instrument could someday settle it. It cannot, and the reason is worth holding on to. Most untested claims in science are untested for practical reasons. We have not yet built the telescope, not yet run the trial, not yet reached the distant place. But quantum immortality is untestable in a far stronger sense. It is untestable because the structure of the claim itself ensures that the evidence can never assemble in any single branch where anyone could read it. The observers who would need to be convinced are, in almost every branch, looking at a dead body. The survivor who is convinced cannot tell their conviction apart from luck. There is no possible world, not a distant one, not a future one, in which the proof comes together and gets written down and persuades the people who are not in the chair. A claim like that does not sit at the frontier of science waiting for better tools. It sits permanently outside the fence, in the territory of things that might be true, but can never be shown to be true, which is the territory of faith and of poetry, not of physics. And once you place it there honestly, a great deal of its power drains away, because it was borrowing all its authority from physics, from the precision and the confirmation, and the 1,000,000,000,000 agreements, and it turns out to have no claim on any of that. It only ever wore the costume. Now let me use this same understanding to clear away the thicket of claims that have grown up around quantum immortality online, because some of them are not just wrong, they are the kind of wrong that can hurt people, and I want to take them apart carefully and with respect for why someone might believe them. The first claim is that near-death experiences are evidence for quantum immortality, that the vivid, lucid, sometimes transcendent experiences people report at the edge of death are signs of consciousness slipping into a surviving branch. I understand the pull of this. The experiences are real, and they are powerful, and people who have them are often changed by them. But the science points somewhere specific and far more grounded. There is a documented biological signature for these experiences. In 2013, a researcher named Jimo Borjigin and her colleagues published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in which they recorded the brain activity of rats in the seconds immediately after cardiac arrest, once circulation had stopped. And what they found was startling. In those final seconds, the dying brain did not simply fade out. It produced a sharp surge of highly organized, synchronized electrical activity, a burst of so-called gamma waves, the kind associated with conscious processing, at levels that briefly exceeded the normal waking state. The brain, in the act of dying, fired one last extraordinary cascade. And in 2022, a separate group led by Raul Vicente documented a strikingly similar surge of organized gamma activity in the brain of a dying human patient, recorded by accident during a medical emergency. The lucid, vivid, time-stretched quality of near-death experience appears to be the signature of a brain in its most extreme state, a nervous system flaring brilliantly as it fails, not the sound of awareness escaping into another branch of the multiverse. The experience is real. Its source is the dying brain itself, doing something remarkable in its last moments, not consciousness migrating across worlds. And as for the stories of people who survived against impossible odds, the person who walked away from the crash that should have killed everyone, the one who beat the disease the doctors had given up on, taken as proof that someone, somewhere is being quantum protected, here the answer is simpler and older than quantum mechanics. With billions of people alive on Earth, extraordinarily improbable runs of luck are not just possible, they are statistically guaranteed to happen to somebody. And the somebody they happen to is, by definition, the one still around to tell the story. We never hear from the billions for whom the long shot did not pay off, because in the ordinary sense they did not survive to be interviewed. We hear only from the survivors, and so survival looks far more miraculous than it is. That is not many worlds. That is survivorship bias, the oldest statistical illusion there is, and it explains every impossible odd story without requiring a single parallel universe. The second claim is stranger and more specific, and it is spread widely. It is the idea that the Mandela effect, the phenomenon where large numbers of people share the same false memory, misremembering a brand logo, a movie line, the spelling of a name, is evidence of memories bleeding across from neighbouring branches of the multiverse, proof that the branches are leaking into one another. And here the physics we built tonight gives a clean and total answer, because it collides head-on with decoherence. The branches never touch. the very mechanism that makes many worlds work, that seals each branch into its own reality, absolutely forbids the exchange of any information between branches, including memories. If branches could leak memories into one another, decoherence would not hold, and if decoherence did not hold, the world would not look classical, and many worlds would not even get off the ground. You cannot use many worlds to explain the Mandela effect, because many worlds, properly understood, is the strongest possible argument that no such leakage can ever occur. And meanwhile, the actual science of memory explains the Mandela effect completely, with no multiverse required. Human memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction, rebuilt every time you recall something, and it is deeply suggestible. The psychologist Elizabeth Loftus spent the 1970s and beyond demonstrating, in experiment after experiment, how easily false memories can be planted in ordinary people, how readily we absorb suggested details into our recollection of events that never contained them. And in 1995, the researchers Henry Roediger and Kathleen McDermott showed that people will reliably and confidently remember words that were never shown to them, simply because those words fit the pattern of what they did see. Shared false memories come from shared biases, shared cultural exposure, the ordinary reconstructive nature of a mind that fills in gaps. They come from the way memory actually works, not from a porous multiverse. The branches never touch, and your misremembering of a cartoon character's name is not a crack in reality. It is just a mind doing what minds do. And now the third claim, the most dangerous one, and I'm going to address it directly and gently, because it matters more than getting the physics right. Some people take quantum immortality to imply that self-harm is consequence-free, that because you always survive in some branch, ending your own life cannot really kill you, that death is somehow not real. I need you to hear this clearly. That is false, even on the argument's own terms, even if you granted every single thing the argument claims. Because even in the full many worlds picture, the branches in which a person dies are completely, totally real. Many worlds does not say the death branches are illusions or that they do not count. It says the opposite. It says all branches are equally real, which means the branches in which someone dies are exactly as real as every other branch, and they contain real bodies, and real and permanent loss, and real people left behind whose grief is not softened in the slightest by the existence of some other branch they can never reach or know about. The argument, even taken at face value, provides no shelter from the consequences of death. It does not reduce them. If anything, it multiplies them, scattering real loss across countless real branches. There is no version of this idea, correctly understood, that makes harm safe or death unreal or suffering survivable in some comforting elsewhere. The physics does not soften death. It does not even claim to. And if anything in this video has stirred a difficult feeling in you, I want you to know that the right place to take that feeling is to another person, someone you trust, someone who can sit with you in this one branch, this real one, the only one any of us can actually reach. That is not a detour from the physics. It is the most important thing the physics has to teach, which is that this branch, this life, these people, are the real and only stakes. So there are the 4 cracks, and the thicket cleared away. The branches are weightless where you survive. The body offers a thinning twilight, not a restoration. The surviving thing was never a single self to begin with, and the whole claim can never be tested, sealed out of science by the very decoherence that makes the multiverse livable. Quantum immortality, laid out at its full and frightening height, and then taken apart, honestly, from 4 directions, with the myths around it dissolved by the same physics that built it. You are not immortal. You can let that particular nightmare go. But I do not want to end on a list of refutations, because that would miss the thing that actually matters, the reason this idea has such a grip on us in the first place. So let me bring you back, in this last part, to where we began, to the dark room, to the thing you could not picture. Because the argument we just dismantled was never really about quantum mechanics at all. It was about a much older and more human mistake, and seeing that mistake clearly is, I think, the closest thing to peace this subject has to offer. Part 12. The Mercy of an Ending. Let me tell you what quantum immortality really was, now that we have taken it apart and can see all its pieces laid out. Strip away the wave functions and the branching and the gun and the Born rule, and what is left at the very centre of the argument is something almost embarrassingly simple, something that has nothing to do with physics at all. At the centre of the argument is the oldest trick the human mind plays on itself. It is the fact that you cannot imagine your own absence. It is the dark room from the very beginning of this video, the moment where you tried to picture not existing and found a watcher still standing in the frame. The entire elaborate machinery of quantum immortality, all the parallel worlds and surviving branches, is that one ordinary universal feeling dressed up in the most sophisticated mathematics humanity has ever produced. It is the mind mistaking the structural unavailability of its own absence for a guarantee of its own continuation. Think about how the trick works, because once you see it, you cannot be fooled by it again. Your awareness can never witness its own end. By definition, there is no experience of non-experience, no moment of being dead that you could ever live through, because the having of moments is exactly the thing that would be gone. So from the inside, your stream of consciousness has a strange one-sided shape. It can find no edge to itself, no boundary, no terminus that it could ever experience reaching. Every moment of your awareness has been, necessarily, a moment in which you existed, because those are the only moments awareness can contain, and the immortality argument takes that necessary structural feature of consciousness, the fact that you only ever find yourself existing, and it reads it as a profound truth about the future, as a promise that you will always find yourself existing. But it is not a promise. It is just the shadow that consciousness casts, the fact that the lights can never show you the room with the lights off. Many worlds did not create this illusion. Many worlds just gave it a vocabulary, a way to say the old feeling in the language of physics, and made it sound, for a little while, like a discovery instead of a confusion. And now, at last, the phrase I asked you to carry from the very beginning can come home, and you will hear how its meaning has completely changed. You have only ever experienced being alive. When I first said it, in the dark room, it sounded like nothing, like a tautology, a sentence that barely said anything. Of course, you have only ever experienced being alive, but now you can hear what is hiding inside it. That little sentence is the entire engine of the nightmare. It is true, completely true. You have only ever experienced being alive, and you never will experience anything else. But the reason is not that you are immortal. The reason is that being alive is the precondition for experiencing anything at all. The sentence is not a clue that your awareness will go on forever. It is just a description of what awareness is. It can only ever report from the inside of existence, because there is no outside from which it could report. The immortality argument heard that sentence and thought it had found a loophole in death. But there is no loophole. There is only a mind that cannot, by its very nature, picture its own silence, and a universe under no obligation to match that limitation with a promise. You have only ever experienced being alive. It was never a guarantee. It was only ever a mirror, showing you the shape of your own awareness, and mistaking that shape for the shape of eternity. Let me take you back to the dark room one last time, now that you understand what the watcher in the frame really is. You are lying in the dark again, as you were at the start, and you try once more to do the impossible thing, to imagine the moment after your last moment. And here comes the watcher, the same as before, the quiet observer who appears in the frame the instant you try to picture the world without you. But this time you recognize it. This time you know what the watcher is. It is not evidence that you will be there. It is not a soul, and it is not a surviving branch, and it is not a thread of awareness threading on into the dark. It is just the structural fact that imagination needs an imaginer, that you cannot picture a scene without someone to picture it, and so your mind, asked to picture its own absence, quietly and helplessly supplies a stand-in and calls that death, and the stand-in is the trick. You see it now, and seeing it, you can do something you could not do before. You can let the watcher go. You can let the picture be what it actually is, which is not a dark room with you in it, but simply the place where the picture ends, the edge of the frame, the last page, not a darkness you will be present for, just a quiet completion you will never have to witness, because there will be no you left needing to witness anything, and that, it turns out, is not a horror. It is a mercy. Because here is the thing the immortality argument was running from, the thing it built an entire multiverse to avoid, and the thing I want to leave you with as you drift off tonight. The ending of a life is not a flaw in the design. It is not a problem to be solved or a loophole to be found. It is the very thing that makes a life, rather than an endless, formless residue of awareness threading on without shape or rest. A piece of music is not made worse by its final note. It is made possible by it. A story is not diminished by its last page. It is completed by it, given its shape, made into a whole thing that can be held and remembered and loved, precisely because it ends. The fear of death and the fantasy of immortality we can see now were both circling the same unanswerable question, the question of which future experiencer is really me, a question that, as we found, has no answer, because it was the wrong question all along. And when you set that question down, when you stop demanding that the stream of awareness go on forever, and let it be the finite, bounded, complete thing it actually is, something loosens. The fear does not vanish exactly, but it changes shape. It becomes something quieter, something closer to the feeling you have at the end of a long and good day, when you're tired in the right way, and the day was whole, and sleep is not an enemy but a kind of rest you have earned. There is an old thought worth offering here because it predates all the physics and survives all of it. The Roman poet Lucretius, writing more than 2,000 years ago, noticed that we are untroubled by the eternity of time that passed before we were born, the endless ages in which we did not exist and were not missed and suffered nothing. None of us lies awake grieving the centuries before our birth, the conversations we missed, the sunrises we were not there to see. That non-existence costs us nothing, and we feel its absence not at all. And Lucretius asks gently, why we should regard the non-existence that comes after our death any differently, since it is the same kind of thing, the same absence of a self to suffer it. The symmetry is exact. There was a time without you, and it did not hurt you, because there was no you to be hurt. There will be a time without you, and by the same logic it will not be a darkness you endure, because there will be no you to endure it. The immortality argument is, in a way, a frantic refusal of that ancient symmetry, an attempt to insist that the after must be different from the before, that this time the self simply must continue. But the before and the after are mirror images, and the mind's inability to picture either of them is the same inability, the same watcher appearing uninvited in the same empty frame. If the eternity before your birth was not a horror, then the quiet after your death need not be one either. It is the same peace, approached from the other side. That is where I want to leave you tonight. Not with a promise that you will live forever, because that promise, looked at closely, was a nightmare wearing the mask of a gift, and not with the cold comfort of a refutation, 4 cracks in an argument, a debate won. I want to leave you instead with the thing that was true before any of the physics, and will be true long after. The thing the argument spent all its ingenuity trying to escape and never could. You are here now. This branch, this one, the only one you will ever reach, is real, and you are in it, and the people you love are in it with you, and it is enough that it does not last forever. It is enough. Perhaps it is everything, precisely because it does not. The universe did not give you a thread of awareness condemned to thread on alone through the dark. It gave you something better and braver and more fragile than that. It gave you a life with edges, a story with a last page, a piece of music that ends. And the watcher you keep finding in the dark, the one who cannot picture the silence, does not need to be afraid of it. The silence is not for you to experience. It is only the shape of the quiet after, the rest at the end of the day, the place where the picture, gently, completes. You have only ever experienced being alive. Let that be at last not a sentence of endless solitude, but the simplest and most ordinary kind of grace. And now, wherever you are, whatever hour it is, you can let the question go and rest.